Every system, economic, social, or personal, produces exactly what it is designed to produce. If a life is producing stress, weakness, stagnation, then its daily habits are engineered for failure. Power is never an accident. It is built brick by brick through repeated behaviors that accumulate into identity. You don't become unstoppable by waiting for motivation, blessings, or opportunity. You become unstoppable by structuring your days in a way that makes weakness impossible and growth inevitable. Waking up before the world demands you is not a poetic lifestyle choice or a romanticized discipline ritual. It is a structural decision about who owns the first and most powerful hours of your life, you or everyone else. The moment your phone starts vibrating, your inbox starts filling, your family calls your name, your employer sends instructions, you are no longer the subject of your day, you are the object being acted upon. Whoever controls the beginning controls the direction. To begin your day before anyone else needs you is to reclaim the only time of the day that is not yet colonized by obligations, algorithms, and demands. Most people wake up into servanthood. They open their eyes already indebted to schedules they did not design, to messages they must answer, to rules they did not write, to problems created by others. They begin on defense, reacting, catching up, apologizing, scrambling. That psychology of starting behind silently programs the nervous system to believe that life is something that happens to them, and they are always arriving late to it. Starting late is not only about hours, it is about identity. It trains you to feel like a responder instead of an initiator. When you wake before the world needs you, you flip the hierarchy. You set the terms before the demands arrive. You enter the day from a position of surplus, not shortage, with mental clarity unpolluted by messages, with emotional neutrality unaltered by other people's moods, with physical stillness unchallenged by traffic, deadlines, or noise. You move from reactive survival to strategic authorship. Those early hours are not just quiet, they are unclaimed. They are the only portion of life not yet taxed by society. During them, you can build the internal infrastructure from which the rest of the day is executed, planning instead of guessing, thinking instead of reacting, strengthening instead of collapsing, creating instead of consuming. It is in the first hour that you decide who you will be for the remaining 16. People say they do not have time to read, reflect, build, plan, or heal. What they mean is they wake up after the world has already taken their time. They exchange their most potent mental state, the state of morning clarity, for digital noise and instant distraction. They give away the sharpest edge of their mind to trivialities before using it on anything that would change their life. The brain in its first waking phase is neurologically primed for imprinting new intentions, learning, and strategic thinking. To waste that window on notifications is to hand your golden hour to someone else's propaganda, crisis, or distraction. Waking early is not just about more hours, it is about different hours. There is a qualitative difference between time earned and time left over. Time before the world wakes is sovereign time, pure, undisturbed, direction setting time. Time after the world has begun is compromised time, negotiated, fragmented, emotionally hijacked time. 1 hour before demand can outweigh 4 hours after it. This practice also engineers a psychological advantage few understand. Entering the day before others gives you the experience of leading reality instead of chasing it. It generates a subtle but powerful belief that you are ahead, ahead mentally, ahead emotionally, ahead in discipline, and that belief changes how you confront adversity throughout the day. A person who has already written, trained, reflected, planned, or prayed before others even open their eyes carries a quiet inner dominance that cannot be faked later. Do not mistake this for a romantic idea about sunrises in silence. This is economic. Whoever steals your morning steals your trajectory. This is psychological. Whoever sets your first emotion sets your threshold for stress. This is strategic. Control the opening move and the game bends in your favor. Starting before the world needs you is the refusal to live life always answering, compensating, responding, apologizing. It is the act of declaring that the first investment of the day is into your own architecture before being loaned out to others. It is the separation between those who are constantly interrupted and those who cannot be disrupted because they have already built something in the hours no one could reach. Do not wait for motivation to form this habit. You start early not because you feel powerful, but to become powerful. There will never be a day when it feels natural to get up before comfort would prefer. That is precisely why the advantage exists. Any space everyone finds easy becomes crowded. The early hours remain a source of leverage because most people will not claim them. The world will always try to recruit your life for its purposes through urgency, noise, expectation, and distraction. To begin your day before the world demands you is to make a counter movie, to seize the only part of life no one has yet claimed and weaponize it for your own becoming. It is an act of sovereignty disguised as an alarm clock. Reading should not be treated as a hobby or a leisure activity reserved for when time is available. It is infrastructure, mental infrastructure, ideological armor, cognitive sharpening. What you read becomes the architecture through which you interpret reality. A mind without intentional input becomes a recycling bin of other people's opinions, advertising, and emotional contagion. If you do not feed the mind with deliberate material, the environment will feed it for you, and the environment is engineered to produce passivity, distraction, and conformity. Reading something that upgrades your mind's operating system means selecting inputs that change how you think, not merely what you know. Most people read the way they breathe, unconsciously, absorbing headlines, posts, comments, captions, and surface level fragments. This does not upgrade thought, it sabotages it. It floods the brain with disconnected, low resolution noise that prevents deep thinking, much like junk calories displace room for nutrition. Superficial reading keeps people loud in opinion and bankrupt in understanding. To upgrade the operating system of your mind, the reading must be intentional, concentrated, and conceptually challenging, the kind that reorganizes mental frameworks and forces the mind to stretch beyond familiarity. Books are not just pages, they are leverage. The right book provides a lifetime of another person's thinking compressed into hours. That is intellectual time travel. You inherit decades of experience without paying the cost of living them. A single argument, a single model of thought, a single historical pattern learned from reading can alter decisions across decades. That is the compounding effect. A small upgrade in thinking, repeated across many mornings, becomes a transformed life trajectory. Reading is also emancipation. The world runs on narratives, economic narratives, cultural narratives, political narratives, most of them designed to benefit someone other than you. If you cannot see through them, you will serve them. Reading deeply gives you lenses that pierce through manipulation and reveal incentives. You become harder to deceive, harder to influence, harder to exploit. Power accumulates to those who understand the rules behind appearances. What you read should not only inform you, it should interrogate you. The most useful reading is not that which agrees with you, but that which disrupts your default conclusions. If you only consume material that confirms your current worldview, you are not learning, you are baptizing your ignorance. Intellectual growth begins where your discomfort begins. A book that destabilizes you is worth more than a stack that flatters you. Upgrading the operating system means replacing old mental scripts with stronger ones, even when ego protests. Reading also engineers internal independence. A person who does not read must borrow his thinking from whoever is loudest. That is intellectual dependency, and all dependency becomes control. If you cannot generate your own frameworks, you must rent those of others. Renting thought creates invisible captivity. Reading original sources, philosophy, history, economics, psychology, biography, gives you raw material for building your own models so that you are not living out someone else's ideology unconsciously. This habit is most potent when done early, before the day contaminates the mind with urgency and noise. The morning mind is uncluttered, the prefrontal cortex is fresh, the cognitive slate is blank. Reading at that time imprints deeply and sets the tone for how the rest of the day is interpreted. 10 pages of serious reading before exposure to screens can redirect the entire direction of your decisions. It becomes intellectual priming. You enter the day already operating with upgraded logic instead of reactive instincts. Do not wait for motivation or free time. You do not read because you feel like it. You read because not reading leaves you mentally vulnerable. Time will never slow down enough to hand you hours for reflection. You steal them. Even 20 minutes daily, compounded across years, separates those who build their minds from those who outsource them. The difference between stagnation and elevation is usually not intelligence, but input. Reading that upgrades the operating system is not escapism. It is preparation, preparation for negotiation, conflict, persuasion, creation, leadership, resistance, design, and strategy. Life punishes those who enter complex situations with untrained thinking. The cost of mental laziness is paid in missed opportunities, repeated mistakes, and predictable crises. Those costs are always larger than the cost of disciplined reading. You do not become unstoppable by celebrating motivation. You become unstoppable by wiring your mind so that weakness, confusion, and manipulation cannot take root. Reading is the daily act of intellectual self defense, and internal construction. It is how you build a mind that is not at the mercy of whatever insists on your attention. A person who upgrades their thinking daily becomes harder to derail, harder to deceive, harder to replace. An untrained mind becomes an employee of the world. A trained mind becomes its architect. Reading is how you choose which one you will be. Doing one hard physical thing every single day is not about fitness, aesthetics, or vanity. It is about engineering a nervous system that does not collapse at the sight of difficulty. The body is the first site where weakness is rehearsed or resilience is built. Every day you avoid physical hardship, you train your brain to interpret discomfort as threat and threat as justification to retreat. But when you force the body to engage with resistance, willingly, repeatedly, the mind learns that discomfort is not fatal, fatigue is not final, and pain is not a command. It becomes instruction in dominance over impulse. Modern life has insulated people from meaningful physical effort. Elevators, cars, climate control, instant gratification, all of it removes friction. But a life without physical struggle does not produce peace, it produces fragility. A body that never meets intensity becomes biologically unprepared for stress, and a mind housed in that body becomes psychologically fragile. When the body is weak, the emotions panic faster, the decisions degrade quicker, and the tolerance for adversity shrinks. Physical softness becomes mental vulnerability. To do one hard physical thing a day is to reverse that decay. It does not need to be heroic. It needs to be uncomfortable. A cold shower that shocks your system awake, a sprint that burns your lungs, a set taken to failure, a timed walk with weight, push ups until your arms tremble. It is not the metric that matters, it is the confrontation. The lesson is in the moment where the body screams stop and you continue anyway. That moment rewires identity more than any motivational speech ever could. People underestimate how deeply the body instructs the mind. When you repeatedly push through a physical wall, the brain encodes a new association. I finish what is hard even when I don't feel like it. That code transfers everywhere to negotiations, to crises, to discipline in work, to standing firm under pressure. You cannot fake resilience under emotional or financial stress if you have never built it under muscular stress. The body is the training ground for all other battles. This practice also kills the delusion that you must feel ready before acting. Hard physical effort exposes how unreliable feelings are. Rarely do you wake up excited to push yourself to the edge. You do it despite reluctance. That is the muscle that matters, acting without permission from emotion. Those who wait to feel ready live on the sidelines of their own potential. When you do something physically hard first in the day, the entire world looks lighter afterward. Hard effort recalibrates the scale of difficulty. After a workout that almost breaks you, emails are not stress, traffic is not catastrophe, criticism is not threat. The brain reorganizes its ranking of problems. You become harder to agitate, harder to intimidate, harder to derail. A strong body does not guarantee peace, but it creates the internal condition where chaos has less power. Some believe they need a gym or equipment or time. That is just another dependency masquerading as logic. The point is not the environment, the point is the resistance. Your own body is enough to break your comfort if you are willing to confront it honestly. A person can become dangerous with nothing but gravity and discipline. Doing something physically hard daily also teaches you the most important economic rule of life: compounding. One session does not transform you, 10 sessions do not either. But months of uninterrupted repetitions build a creature that barely resembles the original. Strength is not built in dramatic moments, but in the unglamorous repetition of micro decisions, choosing stress over softness once a day until it becomes default. There is also a philosophical truth buried inside physical hardship: there is no growth without friction. A muscle must tear to rebuild stronger. A lung must burn to expand capacity. A limit must be violated to be replaced by a new one. Those who avoid strain avoid evolution. Those who run toward it accelerate beyond the crowd that is negotiating with comfort. This single daily act becomes a declaration: I will not live inside a body that makes my mind weak. I will not treat comfort as a right. I will not let biology default me into fragility. Every drop of sweat becomes a small act of rebellion against the softness that society encourages and the mediocrity that comfort breeds. One hard physical act per day is not fitness. It is identity engineering. It is the daily rehearsal of self overrule. It is how you make sure that when life hits with something you did not choose, you have already trained yourself to do hard things, not once in a while, but as the way you exist. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the removal of interference. The brain is not built to think while under constant noise, stimulation, conversation, reaction, and digital interruption. People assume they lack clarity because life is complicated, but often they lack clarity because their mind never has room to think beyond the latest notification, argument, task, or feed. A noisy mind cannot build strategy, it can only process demands. Silence is not a luxury, it is the operating condition under which deep thought becomes possible. Modern life punishes stillness. Every device, platform, and interaction is engineered to pull attention outward, to fragment cognition into micro bursts of reaction. This creates a particular kind of mental poverty. People become excellent at responding and terrible at designing. They can answer messages, follow tasks, and consume content, but they cannot architect direction. Without intentional silence, the mind becomes a mirror of the environment, reflecting whatever enters instead of generating original thought. Scheduling silence is the antidote. Not accidental silence that happens when life slows down, but deliberate, protected, daily intervals where you remove all inputs. No screens, no talking, no tasks, no entertainment, no noise, and you sit with your own cognition. At first, the mind resists because it is addicted to stimulation. Restlessness is withdrawal. But if you hold the silence long enough, beneath the mental static, new thinking begins to surface. Memory organizes, priorities reorder, conflicts reveal their root, ideas connect, long term perspective reappears. Strategic thinking does not emerge from urgency, it emerges from distance. You cannot see the structure of a problem from inside the noise of it. Silence elevates you above the immediate, so you can perceive the mechanics beneath the visible. In silence, you stop playing the piece and start seeing the board. You examine not only what you are doing, but why and to what end. You discover misalignments you could not detect while busy, relationships that drain, routines that sabotage, habits that compound the wrong direction, projects that no longer serve your future. Most people live inside momentum rather than intention. They keep doing because they started doing. Silence interrupts that inertia. It gives you the cognitive room to interrogate your trajectory. Is this worth my years? Is this my path or a path inherited from expectation? What must be eliminated, not just improved? What would my life look like if I were not afraid to change it? These questions cannot be answered in motion. Silence also upgrades emotional control. When the mind never pauses, emotions drive behavior unexamined. But when you sit in silence, emotions reveal themselves. Impatience, resentment, fear, envy, avoidance, and once named, they lose their unconscious authority. Silence converts raw emotion into observed data, which can then be used strategically instead of impulsively emitted. Strategic silence is not meditation for calm, it is meditation for clarity. Calm is a side effect, not the objective. The objective is sovereignty, to regain the ability to think a thought to its end without interruption. People underestimate how rare that is. A single uninterrupted hour of deep thinking is more valuable than 10 frantic hours of business. Strategy compresses effort, noise multiplies it. This practice must be scheduled, not left to chance, because the world will always fill any unclaimed time with noise. Protect it with the same seriousness you protect income. Close the door. Put the phone in another room. Sit with a notebook only for capturing what emerges, not for planning tasks. Let the mind roam without input until structure appears. The first minutes may feel useless, the last minutes often rearrange your entire month. Over time, scheduling silence trains the brain to anticipate deep thinking the way muscles anticipate load. Ideas surface faster. Long-term patterns become visible. You begin to think in decades, not hours. You stop being seduced by urgency because you can see its cost in the larger arc. The person who thinks at this altitude is impossible to manipulate. Advertising, drama, trends, peer pressure, and panic lose power because you are no longer living at the same layer of consciousness as those who never stop to think. Silence also reveals what you have been avoiding. In noise, you can outrun truth. In silence, truth catches you. Truths about relationships you should exit, goals you no longer believe in, behaviors that betray your standards. That confrontation is uncomfortable, which is why most seek noise. But only confronted truth can be corrected. Strategy requires honesty before action. A life without scheduled silence is a life outsourced to noise. You may work hard, but you will rarely work on the right thing. You may stay busy, but you will not advance. Silence is the discipline that separates those who live by momentum from those who live by design. When you deliberately remove noise each day, you reclaim authorship of your mind, and whoever owns the mind owns the life. Producing before consuming is a structural reversal of how most people live. The default pattern in modern life is to open the eyes and immediately absorb messages, news, comments, entertainment, feeds, opinions, arguments, requests. The first act of the day becomes consumption, and consumption puts the mind into reaction mode. The brain begins the day adapting to what others have created instead of generating anything of its own. A person who consumes before producing is training their identity to be downstream of other people's output. Production is not just about making things, it is a declaration of agency. When you produce, write, design, plan, build, solve, record, decide, you impose your intention onto the world before the world imposes its noise on you. It is a psychological inversion. You begin as the cause, not the effect. You set the tone rather than absorbing one. A day that begins with production is a day claimed. A day that begins with consumption is a day surrendered. The brain in its early hours operates in its cleanest and most strategic state. Before conversation begins and demands accumulate, cognitive bandwidth is unfragmented. Using that bandwidth to consume is like using pure fuel to idle in place. Using it to produce is like launching forward before traffic forms. Once you open the door to consumption, social feeds, inboxes, chats, news, your mind becomes occupied with other people's priorities, problems, and narratives. Those inputs create emotional residue that distorts thinking for hours. Even a single emotionally charged message can hijack your attention and redirect the entire day. Producing first also kills the illusion that you must feel inspired to create. If you start with consumption, you outsource inspiration to other people's output. You wait to feel something before doing something. But if you produce first, you learn the opposite lesson. Action creates momentum, not mood. The act of producing, even imperfectly, wakes up the mind's generative engine. You become self sustaining rather than dependent on external intellectual fuel. People often say they lack time to build anything meaningful. What they lack is priority. Consumption always expands to fill available space if not constrained. Hours vanish into scrolling, reacting, and absorbing, and then people try to produce on the leftover scraps of energy. Reversing the order changes the result. Producing first creates output before the world has a chance to drain your capacity. Consumption becomes optional instead of instinctive. This principle scales beyond mornings into the structure of a life. Producers shape markets, consumers are shaped by them. Producers create narratives, consumers repeat them. Producers build leverage, consumers rent it. The gap between those who lead and those who follow is not talent, but sequence. Leaders create before they consume. They impose their ideas onto the world while others are still absorbing the ideas of others. Producing before consuming also reduces dependency on external validation. When the first thing you see in a day is feedback, likes, notifications, or comparisons, your nervous system calibrates itself around external approval. Your mood begins controlled by strangers. But when you begin by producing privately before anyone sees, you anchor your identity in effort, not applause. You build for the sake of becoming, not for the sake of being seen. There is also a compounding effect. One page written per day before consumption creates a book. One solution designed before consumption builds expertise. One plan drafted before consumption builds order. One recording, one sketch, one prototype, one strategic outline, stacked daily, builds a portfolio of outputs that a reactive consumer will never produce in a lifetime. The world rewards what exists, not what was intended. Production turns intention into existence. This habit also protects mental sovereignty. Consumption exposes you to agendas, anxieties, propaganda, social comparison, marketing, and outrage. These forces alter your mood, beliefs, and decisions without your permission. Producing first erects a psychological barrier. You engage with the world after anchoring yourself in something you created. You meet input with an already set identity instead of allowing input to set it for you. To live as a pure consumer, first thing in the day or across an entire lifetime, is to surrender authorship. Someone else writes, you react. Someone else thinks, you adopt. Someone else builds, you watch. But the person who produces before consuming becomes the origin, not the echo. They start from creation, not absorption. They become the source others will eventually consume. Producing before consuming is not a productivity hack, it is an existential stance. It is the refusal to begin the day indebted to the world's noise. It is the daily act of declaring, I will create my reality before reality tries to write me. Dependency is not always obvious. It hides inside routines, conveniences, people, platforms, substances, emotional crutches, and habits we believe we need to function. Every dependency is a silent contract. Something outside of you has the power to destabilize you if removed. To remove one dependency each day is to reclaim 1 unit of freedom per day, not in theory, but in structure. Freedom is not a feeling, it is the absence of constraint over your decisions, emotions, and momentum. People believe dependency only refers to addictions or dramatic attachments. But most dependency is subtle. The need to check a phone to feel oriented, the need for praise to feel capable, the need for coffee to begin, the need for noise to avoid thinking, the need for company to feel calm, the need for guidance before taking action, the need for distraction to escape discomfort, the need for routines to be perfect before starting. These dependencies weaken sovereignty because they outsource emotional regulation and decision making to external factors. Removing one dependency per day is not about destruction, it is about subtraction of control points. Each time you identify something you must have to remain functional, you have located a leverage point over you. If the world can threaten that point, it can manipulate you. The person who cannot function without constant stimulation is easy to control with boredom. The person who cannot be alone is easy to control with withdrawal. The person who cannot act without reassurance is easy to control with ambiguity. Dependence creates vulnerability. The work begins by noticing the micro statements the mind uses. I can't function unless I can only do this if I won't start until. These are signals of captivity. The goal is not to remove everything at once, but to dismantle dependency one unit per day. Skip the addiction to scrolling before bed. Drive without music to expose your mind to silence. Work without checking messages for the first hour. Drink water instead of caffeine for a morning. Make a decision without asking anyone. Sit with discomfort instead of soothing it. Each removal is a small rehearsal of self rule. Psychologically, dependencies create identity anchors. You begin to see yourself as someone who requires certain conditions to perform or cope. When you remove the dependency, you rewrite identity. You become someone who operates regardless of conditions. That rewrite is more valuable than the act itself. The withdrawal is not the purpose, the detachment is. Each dependency removed tells the nervous system you are not fragile, you are not conditional, you are not owned. As you remove dependencies, emotional bandwidth increases. Much of anxiety comes not from problems themselves, but from fearing the loss of what we depend on. If you depend on comfort, discomfort feels like threat. If you depend on praise, criticism feels little. If you depend on routine, disruption feels like crisis. When dependence is removed, fear collapses with it. You cannot fear losing what you do not rely on. This practice also reveals which dependencies were replacements for work you avoided. Many distractions and habits exist to numb a truth the mind does not want to confront. Something in life that should be changed but isn't. When you strip away dependencies, you lose the buffer that protected you from reality. That exposure is productive, it forces correction over avoidance. Removing one dependency daily compounds the same way financial investing does. Independence is built not through a single breakthrough, but through cumulative detachment, one less chain today, one less chain tomorrow. Over months, the gap between someone who lives with 20 dependencies and someone who lives with two becomes enormous. The first is easily derailed, the second is anti fragile. This habit also shifts the relationship to control. You begin to separate what you control from what controls you. Dependence flips that equation. It gives external factors veto power over your strength, decisions, and progress. Removal returns that veto to you. Your life becomes less reactive, less condition based, less negotiable. You do not need the right mood, environment, or stimuli to perform. You act because acting is structural, not circumstantial. Dependency removal is not asceticism. The goal is not to eliminate pleasure or comfort. The goal is to ensure none of it is required for you to function or remain sovereign. You can still enjoy what you are no longer enslaved to. Enjoyment without dependence is freedom. Dependence without awareness is captivity disguised as habit. Removing one dependency each day is quiet rebellion. It is how you become someone the world cannot easily manipulate, withhold from, or destabilize. It is the daily construction of a life where the terms of your existence are not decided by what you cannot live without, but by what you choose despite every condition.